Hi there, welcome back to Andertons TV. My name is Rob. I'm here with Elliot from Soundcraft, and we are looking at mixers. So, everyone knows what a mixer is, but how do they work and what is everything here? So, would you be able to talk me through this and tell us what's actually going on?
Yeah, for sure. So you say that point, everyone knows what mixers are. Well, yes and no, maybe.
Okay.
I think a lot of guys might know generally that stuff comes in, or sound comes in, then sound goes out, and sounding very different. But I think the general consensus of people would look at this and think it looks overwhelmingly complicated. And I get that question all the time about yourself, but how do you know what all those controls do? For me, it's very easy, but I can see by other people why it'd be complicated.
Just looking at it, like, what is going on?
A sea of controls.
That's it.
It's like, I had the usual kind of, it's like driving the Starship Enterprise and all these other things. So when you walk up to this console, obviously you're seeing a lot of controls, but the number one thing to bear in mind is that, yes, there's a lot of them, but a lot of them are doing the same thing. And the number one way to kind of look at a console and analyse exactly what it's doing is just to forget about all this, just look at the furthest strip on the left.
Just the one strip?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we ignore all of these, let's start at the top. So we've got a mic input, I guess.
That's right, absolutely. Mic input, that's where you plug your microphones. So you have an XLR connector there for your mic. You have a jack connector beneath, which is for line inputs. It all depends on what you're trying to plug in. If you're going to plug in a mic, obviously you're going to plug that into the mic input. If you plug in things like keyboards, CD players, MP3 players, anything like that, you plug that in to the jack input.
Cool.
You can do things vice versa, you're getting things like DI boxes, all that kind of stuff, but we'll forget about that for now.
Okay.
But on a mixing console, you can plug in line inputs and mic inputs.
Sure.
Some consoles have them on the top here, some consoles have them on the back.
Same thing, just
all the
placement.
same thing,
Sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
So moving down, we've got the gain.
Absolutely, that's a gain control, and that is probably the most important thing, I'd say, on an analog console. Sometimes it's called sensitivity control, but essentially what it's doing is it's taking a relatively small signal that's being plugged in here, and then the gain control is boosting it to a signal that the console can work with. I see a lot of guys where the gain controls are always down minimum and all the faders are all the way up to the top, and they can't get the balance that they need.
That's it.
It's all about gain staging.
Extra,
the gain staging is the fancy word.
Gain
people
staging.
like to say.
It's very
gain
fancy
staging.
word, isn't it?
People say, it's all about gain staging this, gain staging that. They are right, sadly. If you have poor gain settings up here, the whole rest of the mixing console and your operation is going to be very compromised. So essentially what we want to do with that gain control is to boost the signal to what we call operating level. And there's ways of doing that we'll get into, but essentially what it means is taking all your inputs, boosting them to the right level to work with, and then progressing down the rest of the channel strip.
Okay. So on this desk particularly, you've got some kind of filter or cutoff.
That's right.
And then you've got a USB return. Obviously, that's not on every mixer.
That's right.
But if we explain why that's there.
Absolutely. Well, the high pass is something you're going to find on a lot of things. Sometimes it's called low cut on some American consoles or interfaces. But essentially what that's doing is just cutting all of the frequencies below 100 hertz.
Sure.
And it's not just like a brick wall. It kind of
just a
does it
gradual,
gently.
Yeah.
And for instruments like vocals, overheads, or instruments that kind of low frequency area is not needed, you're generally going to kind of press that in to cut those frequencies out.
Cool.
And then the USB return switch, as I say, this is kind of more exclusive to this console, which is the 22MTK, which has a USB interface built in, all that kind of cool stuff.
Just a little bit of a plug.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you're not going to find that on most consoles.
No.
But it's always nice.
I think it's starting to appear more and more. I think as the digital takes over, or is integrated, shall we say, you might see a few more of those on desks in the near future. So if we move on to the EQ section, it looks as if you've got quite a hefty EQ.
Yes, this console does, but generally all consoles are going to do something in this area that's very, very similar. So this console has what we call a 4-band semi-parametric EQ. So when you hear the word parametric in regards to EQ, usually what that means is that rather than just having bass and treble, you can have a treble control, but then you also have a frequency sweep which determines where that treble is boosting or cutting.
Sure.
That's the parametric aspect of it. The easiest way of seeing that is if you get on your DAW or something like that, you usually get that screen up which has the fancy graph, and the line goes up and down with boost and cut, and then the line goes left and right, which is your sweep. That is the parametric motion.
I think that's a good analogy because a lot of people are working on software.
Familiar with that.
And they're like, what do these dials do? In actual fact, it's the same thing.
Yeah. There's always the argument, when people know exactly how that graph works, but they never know what this stuff does.
That's it. And I think it only takes a little bit of an adjustment, but I think once you've made the connection, it's probably much easier to
Absolutely,
understand.
yeah, and you'd probably find you get better results as well if you
Absolutely.
just look away from the screen.
That's
and
it.
towards the
Just
knobs.
use your ears.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
It.
Yeah.
So moving on to auxiliaries.
Yes.
So you've got 3, or was it 5 auxiliaries?
Yes, this console has 5. They have different colours for slightly different reasons. But I mean, on an analog console, you could have 2, 3, 6, as much as 8 on some of the larger ones. But again, it's just the same thing repeated 8 times on the larger ones.
Okay.
So at the top we have aux 1, then it goes aux 2, aux 3, and so on. And aux stands for auxiliary. That's not the same aux that you'd find in your car stereo.
No.
Slightly different. It's an auxiliary mix, if you like. So assuming that you have a front of house mix being sent to your speakers up front where your audience is listening to, the auxes are used to create kind of separate mixes for your musicians. Things like a vocalist is going to want to hear a certain thing, a drummer's going to want to hear something slightly different. So you satisfy those musicians using these aux controls here.
From my experience with these, they're very simple to operate because a lot of people think, oh, it's another dial to worry about.
That's
but in actual fact, it's a case of deciding what mix is going to which output and then selecting it to the right volume.
Absolutely.
Which I think is so simple for people to get used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a lot of controls there, but they're all doing the same thing, very simple thing.
Yeah, not to worry, there's a lot, but it's controllable. So
absolutely, yeah.
The next one is obviously the difference between the blue and the green. Obviously not the same on every desk, but in this situation, what's happening?
On this console, the blue controls are feeding the built-in effects. I mean, you do typically on other manufacturers, you will find that one row or 2 rows of the auxes have a different colour. Usually what that would signify is that aux is what we call post-fader. So this is like the most boring aspect of the console, but I'll try and do it briefly. So when you talk about creating mixes for musicians, things like that, you're always going to want to do it pre-fader. Because what that means is that no matter what you're doing in front of house, for example, if your singer's absolutely awful and you want to keep him right down in front of house, but you want to make sure he's hearing himself and that, well, no matter what you're doing at the front of house, his feed into his in-ears or his monitor's not going to change.
Fine.
If you use a post-fade aux for that, obviously if you ditch his fader in the front of house, he's then not going to be able to hear
Fine.
what he's listening to, which is not, you don't want to do that for musicians.
No.
You want to make sure they're listening to something consistent.
That's it.
But what a post-fade mix is great for is for things like effects, and that's how we're using them here. So what that essentially means is that if you ditch a vocal fader or turn it down in the front of house, it's also going to kill its being sent to your reverb as well. Otherwise, if it was sent pre-fader, even though you've turned it down in the front of house, you're still going to hear the wet signal, sound like it's in a bathroom somewhere.
That's it.
So yeah, it all depends on what you need to use it for. Post-fade stuff is not so popular nowadays because it's just not needed with you haven't got to worry about it with effects built into consoles nowadays. But yeah, you usually drive effects using post-fade mixes.
Okay. So moving down to the last portion of it, you've got your pan, obviously self-explanatory, left and right. Down below there you've got your mute, again, really simple. And then you've got these 4 buttons here, so PFL.
Yes, so that's cool. It stands for pre-fade listen. So it's a little bit like the solo button you find on a DAW.
Fine.
A little bit. But obviously on a DAW, when you solo a channel, what it's essentially doing is muting all the other channels. On a live sound desk, you don't want that to happen. No. Some desks do it, and it's called solo in place. If your mixer does have one of those on there, make sure it's not pressed when you do live gig. It's not a good place to be.
Talking from experience.
Yes, sadly, yes. But yeah, PFL, pre-fade listen. So what it essentially means is that, we talked about the gain control earlier and gain staging and getting the input to the best possible level to start processing. If you select the PFL control, what that essentially does is it sends the output of that channel to the headphone output here. So say you've got your band doing its thing, put your headphones on, press the PFL switch, then you'll be listening to that channel exclusively in your headphones. And then what that also does is it routes that channel to the meter. And then what that allows you to do is to listen to the channel, see the input level of that channel, and then adjust the gain until you have the level just at the right point on the meter. And that's what we call operating level.
So that's a really useful feature because a lot of people think they have to do it in the room, have to hear exactly what's going on. I know not every desk has a pre-fader listen, but if you have a desk which does, that's extremely good to get a precise mix.
Yeah, as I say, the gain control is probably the most important part of a console. If you get it right there, the rest of it's going to be much easier for you. And the PFL allows you to get that control
and just kind of hone in on the sound.
Absolutely. And also, say you're listening to a band and you think something don't sound right, you've got some sort of resonance, or you have, maybe tom mics, for example, they're susceptible to having this kind of vibrations or something going on in there. You could go through each channel and press the PFL switch until you hear something that's not quite sounding right. And so again, you treat it kind of as a solo button, but it doesn't quite work in the same way as a DAW.
Brilliant. So the last three here, obviously faders, as you can see, are faders. And then you've got the three here. So you've got MST, which I guess is your master.
That's right, yeah.
And 1, 2, and 3, 4, which is probably relating to the groups.
Absolutely, yeah.
How does that work?
So these are our output routing switches for each channel. So obviously when the MST switch is engaged for a channel, that means that the output of this fader is being sent to the master.
Okay.
And again, if you press the 1, 2 switch, on that channel, the output of that group is being sent straight into the group 1 and 2 output. So what you might want to use that for is if you have 10 channels of drums, for example, if you're doing a particularly large kit, you can send all of those channels out to group 1, 2. So what that means is if you want to turn the overall level of the drums up, you can just reach for 2 faders rather than trying to put your hands on 10.
Just to crab it out, that's not going to work.
And then what's great about this console, again, some other consoles don't quite work like this, is that you can have any channel routed to any destination at any time. So we could have your drums being routed to group 1, 2, but they could also be sent to the front of house, or what you can also use that for is that if you want to run subgroups of a separate level on your console, so say you want your tops to come out your left, right, and then your subgroup to be on a separate pair, you can send your kick drum, your bass, your keys, anything that needs that sub-reinforcement.
So you can give it a bit more of a dynamic arrangement.
That's right, and you can send the instruments that you want to send to the subgroups.
That's really useful. As you said, you don't have that on every desk.
That's right.
This one is particularly good because you can do that. And I
Absolutely.
think say you're in a pub, to put it on a real basic level, you're in a pub and for some reason it's got an odd shaped building and you've got 4 speakers, 2 front of house and you've got another 2 which you can arrange how you like.
Yeah.
But if you want to use the more bassier elements, so your bass guitars, your keyboards, then you can use the desk to arrange it in that fashion. Is that how you
kind
do
of, yeah. But what it really means is that you have more output options. Some consoles you can either send a channel to the master or to the subgroup, never both at the same time. But whereas on this console, in your situations, you say maybe it's a pub, we've all played these kind of venues, where it's kind of this weird L shape. You have people standing in front and you have some people around the corner.
Yeah.
You can send your channels to the speakers at the front, whilst also sending your subgroup out the speakers at the side. Maybe there's people standing right in front, they're not going to want to hear so much guitar. Maybe they don't want to hear overheads, for example, because they're standing right in front of the damn thing. Yeah. But whereas around the corner, you may want to send all the channels over there to give it a little bit more of a general mix.
So it just gives you more flexibility in general.
Yeah.
So how do I use effects on a mixer?
Sure. Well, there's kind of 3 elements to make the most out of your effects on a console. The first element is your send. So basically what that is you're determining what you're sending into your effects engine. The second element is obviously the effect itself. The reverb, the pre-delay, the decay time, all these parameters. And then the third element is the return level. How loud that's actually going to be in your monitors or in your front of house. So on this console, obviously the first element is addressed using these controls here. These are your send. So if you want to send vocals on channel 13, you just turn the control up there on 13. Now that channel was being sent into your effects engine. And in terms of the parameters at stage 2 we were talking about, on here you have loads of different algorithms. This one's done in a fancy way, but some consoles you find just a digit display and then a long list of what those numbers mean. Number 10 means plate, number 11 means hall, that kind of stuff.
Condensed, isn't it? Yeah.
That's it. You just select which one you want to use. Some consoles will give you some parameters that you can change, like decay time, how long the reverb takes to decay, pre-delay, how long it takes for the reverb to start, all that kind of complicated stuff. That's all personal taste, that kind of stuff. And then the output of those effects engines on this console are sent to a pair of faders here. So you can, if you want to turn the effects up into your front of house, you can just do that by turn the faders up on your returns. What I would say is, in terms of effects, is that I think especially people who are used to DAWs and used to mixing in virtual spaces, if you like, or maybe they're recording things in a very dry fashion so they can add that space later on, is what they tend to do is they walk up to a console like this and they'll just drench everything in effects. But generally, if you're doing live sound, you're in a space that has its own sound, has its own reverb, and what you'd find is that less is
Absolutely.
Always more.
Always more.
On a console. This has a lovely effects engine, and a lot of them do. A lot of consoles have really nice sounding built-in effects. But yeah, I'd always recommend less, with as minimal effects as possible.
Okay. So that's a really, really good explanation of how desks work. As I said, it does change in various places. You get more, you get less, but the fundamentals you've pretty much gone over. If you've got any questions, obviously you can comment below. If you wanted any physical hands-on help, obviously we have people in store every day to talk about PA stuff. If you liked it, obviously hit that like button, and I guess we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the Andertons YouTube music technology channel. If you're a guitar player, or you play bass, or a drummer, or you're into keyboards, you might like one of our other YouTube channels, and I'll put links to those in the description below. Anyway, if you'd like to find out more about the products we featured in this video, please click up here. If you'd like to watch another video from this channel, please click here. If you'd like to buy a t-shirt like the one I'm wearing, click down here. And lastly, if you'd like to subscribe to our Music Tech YouTube channel, please click down here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.